The market was alive with noise, filled with voices of strange creatures from many worlds. The smell of dust, smoke, and burning oil hung heavy in the air. In the middle of this chaos stood a woman named Lyra. She was tired, her eyes empty, her body weak. For years she had known nothing but pain and betrayal. Once she had dreamed of freedom, of love, of living a life without chains. But now those dreams were broken. Her ex-husband, a cruel man with sharp eyes and a greedy smile, stood beside her. He was not here for her happiness. He was here for money. To him, she was not a person. She was only property, something to sell, something to use, something to throw away. He pulled her by the arm, dragging her through the crowd like she was no more than a broken object. Every few steps, her body shook from exhaustion, but the man yanked her forward. "Stand straight," he hissed. "A weak slave earns nothing." His voice was filled with anger. He had sold her before, again and again, to different masters who treated her with cruelty. And each time when she returned to him, she returned more broken, more fragile. Yet he never stopped. He never cared. He only wanted more money, more power. The aliens in the market gathered around, staring at her with greedy eyes. Some laughed, some whispered about her pale skin and human shape. On this planet, humans were rare, almost forgotten. To them, she was something exotic, something to own. Lyra lowered her gaze, wishing she could vanish into the ground. The voices around her felt like knives cutting into her spirit. Her heart was heavy, but her mind whispered a quiet thought. This cannot be forever. One day, something must change. Then, in the middle of the noise, she felt it. A gaze. Not the same cruel stares of the aliens. This one was different. It was strong, steady, and filled with something she had not felt in a very long time. Pity. She lifted her head, slowly, carefully, afraid it might be a trick of her tired mind. Across the market, standing tall among the strange crowd, was a man. Not an alien, not a monster, a man, a human. He looked different from the others. His clothes were simple but strong, worn like he had traveled far. His hair was dark, his face scarred by old battles. But his eyes burned with fire. He was not laughing at her. He was not planning to buy her. His gaze held something deeper, something dangerous, something human. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Lyra's ex-husband continued shouting at buyers, waving his hands, trying to get a good price. But Lyra no longer heard his words. She only saw the man, and he saw her. The man's name was Jackson, though she did not know it yet. He had walked many worlds, seen many wars, and lost more than he cared to admit. But when his eyes fell on Lyra, something inside him moved. He had seen slaves before. He had seen cruelty before. But this was different. The market was not the place to act. The laws of this planet were cruel, and anyone who interfered with trade could be killed on the spot. Yet Jackson's fists tightened, his jaw clenched. Inside, a fire grew. He wanted to save her, to break her chains, to destroy the man who called himself her husband. But he could not yet. As Lyra was pushed closer to the center of the market, Jackson stepped forward. He moved quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. And then, when no one else was looking, he whispered. His voice was low, soft, and carried only to her. "You are not alone." The words struck her like a lightning bolt. Her eyes widened, her breath caught. For so long she had lived in silence, believing no one cared. No one saw her suffering. But here, in the middle of this cruel market, a stranger's voice told her otherwise. Her ex-husband noticed nothing. He was too busy haggling with a fat alien trader. But Lyra stood frozen, her mind spinning. Not alone, the words were simple, but to her, they were everything. She dared to look up again, to meet the man's eyes. He did not smile. He did not move closer. He simply stared back, his face hard, his eyes alive with a promise she could not understand. A promise of something more. For the first time in many years, Lyra felt a spark inside her chest. It was small, fragile, almost impossible to believe. But it was there. Hope. The crowd's laughter returned to her ears. The pulling of her arm reminded her of her chains, but the whisper echoed in her heart. You are not alone. She did not know who he was. She did not know why he cared, but in that single moment, everything changed. The market continued as if nothing had happened, but for Lyra, the world was no longer the same. Somewhere out there, someone had seen her not as a slave, not as property, not as a broken thing. Someone had seen her as human. And in that gaze, in those words, she felt the beginning of something powerful, something that could not be bought or sold. The beginning of a story that would shake the stars. The market slowly emptied as the sun dipped behind the red mountains. The alien traders packed away their goods, their laughter echoing across the streets. For most, the day was finished, but for Lyra, the torment never ended. Her ex-husband dragged her back toward the holding quarters, the chains around her wrists digging deep into her skin. She walked with lowered eyes, each step heavy. The whisper from earlier still echoed in her mind. "You are not alone." It had been a simple phrase, spoken by a stranger, but it clung to her like a fragile flame in the dark. She replayed it again and again, afraid it might fade away. Behind the crowd, moving like a shadow, Jackson followed. His eyes never left her. He was careful, blending with the noise, his movements calm, almost invisible. He had spent years as a soldier, learning how to move without being noticed. Tonight, those skills served him well. He watched as her ex-husband shoved her into a small iron cage at the edge of the camp. The man locked the bars and laughed with his drinking partners, waving coins in the air. To him, it was just another day of business. To Jackson, it was another crime carved into his memory. Jackson's jaw tightened. He had seen too much suffering across the stars, slaves, broken bodies, and lives destroyed by greed. He had promised himself he would never care again, never let his heart open, but Lyra's eyes had shattered that promise. There had been no fear in them when she looked at him, only emptiness. Emptiness so deep it pulled at his soul. It was not just pity he felt, it was anger, rage at the chains, rage at the man who sold her, rage at the galaxy that allowed such cruelty. But he also felt something else, a pull, a need to protect. He waited until nightfall. The camp grew quiet as the drunken traders collapsed near their fires. The moons rose above the desert, painting the ground in silver light. Jackson moved closer, his steps silent, his figure hidden in the shadows. Lyra sat inside the cage, her knees pulled to her chest. Her face was turned upward, eyes fixed on the stars. She whispered to herself, soft words only she could hear. Maybe prayers, maybe memories of a life she once had. Jackson crouched behind a broken wall, studying her. He wanted to speak, but he held back. This was not the time. If he acted too soon, she would be punished. If he tried to free her now, they would both be hunted and killed. He needed to wait, but waiting was the hardest thing. Finally, as the night grew deeper, he picked up a small stone and tossed it lightly against the bars of her cage. The sound was soft, but enough. Lyra turned her head sharply. Her tired eyes widened as she saw him in the shadows. Her heart pounded. For a moment, she thought it was a trick, another cruel buyer come to mock her. But then she saw his face. The same human, the same fire in his eyes. He raised a finger to his lips, silent. Then, he whispered again, his voice steady, low, carrying across the silence. "I told you, you are not alone." Her lips trembled. She wanted to answer, but fear held her voice. Still, her eyes spoke louder than words. They asked questions she could not say aloud. Why? Who are you? What do you want? Jackson leaned closer, his voice still quiet. "I cannot free you tonight, not yet. They will kill us both if I try. But listen to me. Hold on. Your chains will not last forever." Her chest rose and fell, as if she had been holding her breath for years. She gripped the bars tightly, pressing her face against the cold iron. For the first time in so long, her heart dared to believe. But doubt remained. She whispered back, her voice weak, shaking. Why? Why do you care?" For a moment, Jackson said nothing. His eyes flickered with memories of comrades lost in war, of promises broken, of worlds he could not save. At last he answered, "Because no one deserves this, and because—" He stopped, searching for the right words. "Because I see you. Not as they see you, not as he sees you, I see you." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said such words to her, not since before the chains, not since before betrayal had stolen her life. The night carried their silence, heavy with meaning. Suddenly, footsteps approached. Lyra's ex-husband stumbled from the fire, drunk and muttering. Jackson melted back into the shadows, vanishing like smoke. The man unlocked the cage just to shove her roughly against the bars, laughing as she winced. Then he locked it again and staggered away. Lyra's heart raced, but she hid her face, pretending to sleep. She knew Jackson was still out there, watching, protecting. And though she was still trapped, still chained, something inside her shifted. For the first time in years, she did not feel completely alone. The night stretched on, filled with the silence and distant alien winds. But under that silver moonlight, something new was born between them. Something fragile, something dangerous. A connection. He was still a stranger. She was still a prisoner. Yet the seed of hope had been planted, and hope, even the smallest spark, could burn brighter than any chain. The desert sun rose again, burning hot across the alien camp. Dust blew through the streets, and the sound of metal chains rattled as slaves were dragged out for the day's labor. Among them was Lyra, her body weak, her wrists bleeding from iron cuffs. Her ex-husband walked proudly behind her, a cruel smile on his face. The night before, he had earned coins from his gambling. Now he wanted more. His greed never ended. He dragged Lyra toward the warlord's fortress at the edge of the city. The fortress was dark and sharp, built of black stone, guarded by soldiers with strange glowing weapons. The warlord was waiting. His skin was gray, his eyes yellow and cold. He towered over everyone, wearing armor covered in scars. When he saw Lyra, his lips curled into a cruel grin. "She is rare," the warlord said, his voice like thunder. "A human, pale, weak, but beautiful enough. I will take her." Her ex-husband bowed low, pretending respect, but his eyes glittered with greed. "She will serve you well, mighty one. She can work. She can suffer. She has no spirit left." Lyra's heart twisted. She wanted to scream, to fight, but she had no strength left. Every word spoken about her was like another chain around her soul. She felt herself slipping deeper into despair. The warlord's soldiers shoved her into a cart, chains locked around her ankles. The cart rumbled forward, carrying her into the fortress. The gates slammed shut behind her with a heavy sound that felt final, like the closing of her life. But outside the walls, someone was watching. Jackson, he had followed from a distance, his eyes burning with anger. Each moment tested his control. He wanted to storm the fortress right then, to tear the chains apart, to kill the men who hurt her. But he was only one man. The warlord commanded an army. To rush in blindly would mean death, for him and for her. Still, he could not walk away. His heart refused. He had seen many slaves before, but Lyra was different. She had looked at him not with begging eyes, but with silent endurance. That silence screamed louder than any cry. Inside the fortress, Lyra was thrown into the mines. The air was hot, filled with smoke and poison. The ground shook from heavy machines that tore at the rock. Dozens of slaves worked with broken tools, their bodies covered in dirt. Guards whipped them if they slowed, their cruel laughter echoing in the dark. Lyra picked up a rusted hammer, her arms trembling. Each strike felt heavier than the last. Her body begged her to collapse, but she kept going. She had no choice. The hours crawled by, her lungs burned, her throat dry, her hands raw with cuts. Around her, other slaves fell one by one, dragged away to die unseen. And still, her ex-husband came to collect his reward, coins in exchange for her torment. She saw him smiling, laughing with the warlord, drinking as if her suffering was a feast for his pleasure. That was the breaking point. Her chest burned with rage, stronger than her weakness. For the first time, she lifted her eyes, not in silence, but in defiance. "I will not break," she told herself, "not like they want me to." The guards saw the fire in her gaze. One of them raised his whip, ready to crush that spark. But before it could strike, a sound shook the walls. An explosion. Dust rained from the ceiling as alarms blared. The guards shouted, rushing to the gates. Slaves dropped their tools in shock. Lyra stumbled back, coughing through the smoke. Through the chaos, she caught a glimpse of a figure in the shadows, moving fast, strong, unstoppable. Jackson. He had waited, watching the fortress, studying its guards, learning its weaknesses, and now he struck. The warlord's men shouted, firing their weapons, but Jackson was faster. He fought like a storm, each move precise, each strike filled with fury. He was only one man, but he fought with the strength of many. From her cage in the mine, Lyra's eyes widened. She recognized him instantly. The man from the market, the one who whispered hope. He had come. The guards tried to drag her away, but Jackson's voice cut through the chaos. "Lyra!" Her heart stopped. No one had spoken her name in so long, not with care, not with meaning. The sound of it was like a key, unlocking something inside her. She stumbled forward, chains pulling her back. Jackson smashed through the guards, his fists striking like thunder. He ripped the lock from her cage, grabbed her hand and pulled her close. Her body shook, her voice barely a whisper. "Why? Why save me?" Jackson's eyes met hers, burning with truth. "Because you are worth saving." The words hit her harder than the chains ever had. She wanted to believe them, but fear still clung to her heart. Still, as his hand gripped hers, strong and steady, something inside her shifted. The fortress roared with alarms, soldiers flooding in. The warlord himself rose from his throne, fury in his eyes. "You dare take what is mine?" he thundered. But Jackson did not release her. He stood tall, his body shielding hers, his voice strong. "She was never yours." The warlord's roar shook the walls. The soldiers raised their weapons. And in that moment, Lyra understood. This man was not just a stranger. He was her only chance, her only protector. The breaking point had come. The old life of chains was ending, and a new fight for freedom had begun. The fortress shook with chaos. Smoke curled into the air, alarms screamed, and soldiers ran through the dark halls with weapons raised. Chains rattled as slaves cowered. In corners, their eyes wide with fear. But in the middle of this storm stood Jackson, gripping Lyra's hand tightly. His body was bruised, his clothes torn, but his eyes burned with a fire that no weapon could extinguish. He had come for her, and he would not leave without her. "Stay close," he whispered. Lyra's heart raced. Her legs trembled, her body weak, but something inside her pushed her forward. She had lived her whole life being dragged, beaten, and sold. Now, for the first time, someone was pulling her not toward chains, but toward freedom. Behind them, soldiers shouted, their boots pounding against stone floors. Jackson moved fast, leading Lyra through narrow passages. He had studied the fortress for days, watching guard shifts, memorizing weak points. Every step he took now was part of his plan. But the warlord was not so easily fooled. His deep voice roared through the halls like thunder. "Find them! Do not let the human escape!" The soldiers obeyed. Doors slammed shut, traps activated, energy barriers sparked across the halls, glowing blue and deadly. Jackson cursed under his breath. He pulled a stolen blaster from his belt, firing at the barrier's control panel. Sparks flew, and the light wall shattered. He pulled Lyra through before the guards could close in. Blaster fire echoed behind them. Jackson pushed Lyra into cover, then returned fire with quick, precise shots. Every move he made was sharp, trained, but his heart pounded with something deeper than duty. Every shot he fired was to protect her. Lyra watched in disbelief. For years, men had only used her, treated her as property. But here was a man risking his life for her freedom. Her chest ached, not from fear, but from something unfamiliar, something she could not yet name. "Why do you fight for me?" she whispered when he pulled her back to safety. He didn't answer with a speech. He looked at her, his jaw tight, his eyes fierce. "Because I must." The warlord's soldiers pressed closer. Jackson grabbed Lyra's hand again, dragging her down a stairwell that opened into a wide underground chamber. The air smelled of oil and metal. At the far end, massive gates led outside. Freedom was near. But the warlord himself waited there. His tall frame blocked the exit, his yellow eyes glowing with fury. He held a heavy blade crackling with energy. Around him, more soldiers gathered, their weapons ready. Lyra's heart sank. The path to freedom was sealed. Jackson stepped forward, his grip on her hand tightening. His voice was steady but low. "When I tell you to run, you run. Do not look back." Her breath caught. "But, no," he cut her off. "This is the only way." The warlord laughed, a cruel, echoing sound. "One man against an army? Fool, you will die, and she will suffer for your failure." Jackson's body tensed, his mind raced. He had faced armies before, he had lost comrades before, but this time it was different. This time he was not fighting for war, he was fighting for her. The battle exploded. The warlord swung his blade, the crackling energy cutting through the air. Jackson dodged, firing his blaster at the guards, each shot precise. He moved like a storm, fierce and unstoppable, but every strike cost him strength. His arm bled, his legs shook, but he refused to fall. Lyra stood frozen, her heart screaming. Every instinct told her to hide, to cower, to disappear like she always had. But now, as she watched Jackson fight, something inside her rebelled. For years she had been silent. For years she had been weak, but no more. Her eyes fell on a fallen guard's weapon. Her hands shook as she picked it up, the weight heavy and strange. She had never fought before. She had never even dared. But tonight, she could not stand aside. She raised the weapon. Her voice trembled, but it carried. "You will not take him." The warlord turned, his eyes narrowing in surprise. In that single heartbeat of distract, Jackson struck. He fired into the warlord's armor, sparks exploding across the dark hall. The giant roared in rage, swinging wildly, but Jackson ducked and drove. His fist into the warlord's throat. The beast staggered, choking. Soldiers hesitated, fear creeping into their eyes. "Now!" Jackson shouted. He grabbed Lyra's hand, dragging her toward the gates. Together, they pushed through the confusion. The gates opened into the desert night, cool wind rushing over them. For the first time, Lyra felt fresh air without chains pulling her back. Her chest filled with something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. But behind them, the warlord roared, his voice shaking the fortress. You cannot escape me. I will hunt you to the ends of the stars. Jackson pulled her close, his breath heavy, his eyes still burning. Then let him try. They ran into the night, their shadows stretching long under the twin moons. Behind them, the fortress burned, alarms still echoing. Ahead of them, only the unknown waited, but they were together. And that changed everything. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt not like property, not like a slave. For the first time, she felt like a person worth saving. And with each step, the bond between them grew stronger. The daring rescue was not just an escape, it was the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. The night desert stretched endless under the twin moons. Cold winds swept across the sand, carrying the faint smell of smoke from the fortress they had left behind. Far in the distance, alarms still echoed. The warlord's men would not rest, they would hunt. But for now, Lyra and Jackson kept running. Her bare feet stumbled over stones, her breath heavy, but Jackson's strong hand never let go. He pulled her forward with every step, guiding her through shadows, avoiding the glowing lights of patrol ships sweeping across the dunes. At last, when the night grew quiet, he slowed. "We stop here," he whispered. They crouched in the shelter of a jagged rock formation. The stone gave them cover from the sky, and for the first time, Lyra collapsed into the sand, gasping for air. Her body ached, her chains still cut into her wrists, but she was alive, and free of the fortress walls. Jackson scanned the horizon, his eyes sharp, his blaster ready. Only when he was sure they were alone did he sit beside her. Lyra hugged her knees, shivering in the cold desert wind. For years, she had dreamed of freedom, but now that it was real, she felt lost. What did freedom mean when danger still followed every step? Jackson noticed her silence. His voice was steady, calm. "We're not safe yet. The warlord will send hunters. We have to move by dawn, but for now, you must rest." She turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his. Why? Why are you doing this?" He was quiet for a long moment. The desert wind howled between them. Finally he answered, "Because no one should live in chains. Not you, not anyone." His words carried weight, heavy with memory. She saw it in his eyes, the pain of his past, the ghosts of battles he never spoke of. He was not just a stranger saving her. He was a man carrying wounds of his own. The silence stretched. She wanted to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she whispered something else. "I was sold many times, to men who wanted nothing but my suffering. Why are you different?" Jackson's gaze hardened, but his voice softened. "Because I am human, like you." Her breath caught. Human. The word struck deep. She had almost forgotten what it meant. Surrounded by alien masters, treated like property, she had started to believe she was less than a person. But his voice reminded her. She was human. She was not alone. Through the night, they took turns watching the sky for patrols. When her eyes grew heavy, Jackson covered her with his worn cloak. She slept for the first time in weeks without fear of being beaten awake. By dawn, the desert burned again under a cruel sun. They rose and walked. Every mile was a battle. Her legs ached, her lips cracked from thirst, but Jackson pushed them forward. They moved through canyons and across sand dunes, hiding from flying scouts. Twice, they were nearly caught. Once, a patrol ship hovered so close they could hear the engines hum. Jackson pressed her against the canyon wall, his arms shielding her, his heartbeat strong against her shoulder. She closed her eyes, praying the ship would pass. When it finally flew away, she opened her eyes to find Jackson still holding her, his face only inches away. For a moment, the world was silent. Her chains, her fear, her pain, all faded. But then he pulled back. "We keep moving," he said firmly. His voice carried discipline, but his eyes betrayed something else, something unspoken. By the third day, they reached the edge of the desert. Strange red cliffs rose before them, jagged and sharp. Jackson led her into a cave where they could drink from a small spring. The water was bitter, but to Lyra, it tasted like heaven. Her strength slowly returned. With it came questions. "Where are you from?" she asked one evening as they sat by a small fire of dried brush. Jackson stared into the flames. "Far away, a planet called Earth." "Earth." She repeated the word, tasting it on her tongue. It felt strange, yet familiar. He nodded. "A place where people live free, where no one is sold in chains, where families stay together, where love means more than greed." Her eyes filled with tears. She had never known such a place. To her, it sounded like a dream. "Why did you leave?" His face darkened. He didn't answer at once. Finally, he said, "War. I fought for my people, and when the war ended, I found myself lost among the stars." She studied him quietly. He was strong, hardened, yet broken in ways she could not see. and yet he had chosen to save her. That night, as she lay on the cold ground, Lyra realized something had changed inside her. For years, she had lived with no hope, no reason to go on, and now she had one. Not freedom alone, not survival, but him. The desert had nearly killed her, but it had also given her something new. A bond, fragile, dangerous, but alive. And as she closed her eyes, she whispered to herself words she had not spoken in years. Maybe tomorrow can be different. The red cliffs loomed tall, sharp against the sky. Winds howled through the narrow paths, carrying the taste of dust and metal. For days, Lyra and Jackson had hidden among these rocks, moving like shadows, living on scraps of water and fire. But now the time for hiding was ending. The warlord's hunters had followed their trail. His ships circled the desert skies, and with them came Lyra's ex-husband, greedy, desperate, and furious. He had lost his prize, and he wanted her back. At dusk, Jackson spotted them first. Black ships landed in the canyon, soldiers spilling out like swarms of insects. Their weapons glowed, their voices shouted orders. "They found us," Jackson said quietly. Lyra's heart sank, but she did not tremble. Not this time. Too much had already been stolen from her. She would not let them take more. "What will we do?" she asked. He looked at her, his face grim. "We fight." The words were simple, but heavy. For her, it meant more than weapons. It meant choosing to stand, choosing not to run anymore. As night fell, the enemy marched into the canyon. At their front walked the warlord, tall and monstrous, his blade glowing with crackling energy. Beside him was Lyra's ex-husband, his face twisted in arrogance. He shouted into the night, his voice echoing against the stone. "Lyra, come back to me, or I will make you wish you had never been born." Her stomach twisted. Once his voice had been law. Once she had obeyed every command, broken under every word. But now she looked at Jackson, scarred, tired, but unyielding. He had risked everything for her. She turned, her eyes back toward the canyon. "I will never go back." Jackson nodded, pride flickering in his gaze. He handed her a blaster, its weight heavy in her hands. "Stay close to me. Trust yourself." The battle began. The warlord roared, raising his blade as soldiers rushed forward. Jackson fired, his shots precise, cutting down enemies with swift bursts of light. He moved like a soldier born of war, his body flowing with strength and fury. But the soldiers were many, too many. They surrounded the rocks, their weapons flashing. Jackson fought with everything he had, but he was only one man. Lyra crouched behind him, her heart pounding. Fear screamed inside her, but another voice rose louder, the voice Jackson had planted within her. "You are not alone. You are worth saving." Her hand shook, but she lifted the blaster. The first shot went wide, hitting the stone. But the second found its mark, striking a guard who had crept behind Jackson. He turned surprised, his eyes locking on hers. She nodded quickly, forcing herself to stay steady. "You fight," he said, almost in awe. "I fight," she whispered. Together they stood back to back, firing against the storm of soldiers. The canyon echoed with blasts, roars, and the sound of chains breaking in her soul. The ex-husband screamed from behind the line. "She is mine! Do you hear me, Lyra? Mine!" Her body froze for only a second. His words were sharp, full of the old poison, but she clenched her jaw, raised her weapon, and shouted across the battlefield, "I was never yours!" Her voice echoed, louder than his threats. The soldiers hesitated, startled by the fire in her tone. For years she had been silent. Tonight she spoke with power. Rage twisted the ex-husband's face. He lunged forward, grabbing a fallen sword, charging straight toward her, but Jackson intercepted, blocking his strike with his arm. The blade cut deep, blood spilling, but Jackson stood tall, shoving the man back. "You will never touch her again," Jackson growled. The warlord advanced then, towering above them, his blade shining like lightning. "You cannot win," he thundered. "One human cannot stand against me." Jackson stepped forward, blood dripping, his body heavy with pain. "Maybe not alone," he said, "but I am not alone." Lyra raised her weapon beside him, her eyes blazing. The warlord roared and swung. The clash shook the canyon. Sparks flew as metal met energy, as flesh met fury. Jackson fought with every breath left in him, his strikes fueled by love and rage. Lyra fired again and again, her aim truer each time. The battle stretched like eternity until at last Jackson found his opening. With a final strike, he drove the warlord's own blade deep into his chest. The giant staggered, roared one last time, and collapsed into the dust. Silence fell. The soldiers froze, their leader gone. Slowly, one by one, they dropped their weapons and fled into the night. The canyon grew still. Only the sound of Lyra's breathing and Jackson's heavy steps remained. Her ex-husband lay in the dirt, eyes wide with disbelief, his power gone. He reached for her weakly, muttering her name, but Lyra only stared down at him, her voice steady and cold. "You will never own me again." And with that, she turned away. Jackson leaned against the rock, his chest rising and falling. He was wounded but alive. She rushed to his side, supporting him. Their eyes met. His voice was soft, broken but strong. "We won." Tears filled her eyes. "No," she whispered. "We lived." The stars above the canyon seemed brighter that night. Chains had shattered, not only around her wrists but around her heart. Together, bruised and bleeding, they had made their stand. The last stand was not just a battle. It was the birth of something greater, freedom, hope, and love in the heart of the unknown. The canyon was silent after the battle. Smoke drifted from broken weapons, the ground stained with ash and blood. The warlord's body lay still in the dust, his blade dark and cold. The soldiers who once followed him had scattered into the desert. And there, in the middle of the ruin, stood Lyra and Jackson. He leaned against the rocks, his breathing heavy, his arm bleeding from a deep wound. His strength was fading, but his eyes still burned with the same fire. Lyra pressed her hands against his injury, desperate to stop the blood. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, stay." He gave her a tired smile. "I told you, you are not alone." Her chest ached. Tears slid down her face. She had lived so long with no one, with nothing but cruelty and chains. And now, here he was, broken but alive, refusing to let her fall back into darkness. They moved together into a small cave at the base of the cliffs, shelter from the cold night wind. Lyra tore strips of cloth from her dress to bind his wounds. Her hands shook, but her resolve was steady. When at last the bleeding slowed, Jackson let out a long breath and leaned back against the stone. His eyes closed for a moment, but he was still conscious, still fighting to remain with her. Lyra sat across from him, staring at the fire she had built. The flames flickered, painting shadows on the walls. She thought of the past, of the years lost in chains, of her ex-husband's cruelty, of the warlord's mines. She had been a prisoner, her spirit crushed. But now she felt something she had never known before. She looked at Jackson. "You risked everything," she said softly. "For me." He opened his eyes, meeting hers. His voice was low, rough. "You are worth it." The words sank deep into her heart. For so long she had believed the opposite. She had believed she was worthless, that no one would ever see her as more than a possession. But Jackson's gaze was steady, unshaken. He meant every word. Silence stretched between them, but it was not empty. It was full of meaning, full of something neither of them had spoken yet. At last, Lyra broke the silence. "I don't know how to live free. I don't even know who I am anymore." Jackson leaned forward, his eyes steady. "Then we will learn together." Her breath caught. Together. The word felt strange, heavy, but comforting. The days that followed were slow. They stayed hidden in the canyon, gathering strength. Lyra tended his wounds, bringing him water from the spring. Jackson taught her how to use the blaster properly, how to listen for danger, how to move silently through the desert. But more than survival, he gave her something greater. He gave her belief. Every time she doubted, he reminded her. Every time fear crept into her mind, he spoke the same words: "You are not alone." And slowly, Lyra began to believe. At night, under the twin moons, they sat by the fire. Jackson told her about Earth, a world of oceans, forests, and skies filled with birds. A world where families lived without chains, where people loved without fear. Her eyes filled with wonder as he spoke. She could almost see it, almost feel the breeze of that distant planet. For the first time, she began to dream not of survival, but of life. One night, as the fire crackled low, Lyra whispered, "No one ever looked at me the way you do." Jackson's face softened. He reached out, his rough hand brushing against hers. "That's because they never saw you. They saw only chains. But I see you." Her eyes burned with tears, but this time they were not tears of pain. They were tears of something new, something she had never dared to feel. Love. The word filled her chest, fragile but powerful. She had never spoken it, she had never known it. But now, as she sat beside him in the quiet canyon, she finally understood. He had shown her love not with promises, but with actions, with sacrifice, with courage, with the fire in his eyes that told her she was more than property, more than broken pieces. She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. For the first time in her life, she felt safe, truly safe. The future was still uncertain. The warlord's allies might return, other enemies might come, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was this: she was free, she was no longer a slave, and she was not alone. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Lyra turned to him and whispered the words that had been locked in her heart. "You showed me what love means." Jackson's tired face broke into a small smile. His arm wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her close. His voice was low but steady. "And together, we'll write a new story. Our story." The desert winds carried their voices away, but their bond remained, stronger than chains, stronger than fear. It was the end of suffering, and the beginning of true love.